Hey everybody, this is officially take 3 of this video. I'm trying not to curse here. I've become very frustrated. The first take of this video, my Discord was going off because I forgot that I left it on. I got to the very end of this lecture for the second take, and then at the very last minute, my brother called. And I suppose that I could just be not lazy and I could use video editing software, and I promise that's coming in the future. But today's my birthday. Hey, happy birthday to me, and I do what I want. So, this is the face. This is the face to the name of the instructor who is writing your course. My name is Dr. Sean Broyles, and I try to do some of these videos every single week. I really enjoy, I've been educating for, I've been teaching history for 8 years, and I really prefer doing face-to-face, even during COVID, even doing online stuff. And this is sort of my way to engage with you face-to-face. I really appreciate doing it. It's much more natural to me. I've been lecturing for years, and I'm just not one of those people that's sort of socially shy, because I've made an ass of myself in front of people pretty much my entire life, so it's fine. I'm not worried about it. You fail enough times until you succeed. I wish I could have put out a video for last week, because last week was actually what I spent much of my grad school studying, my original field. So now my PhD is in Islam. I do Islamic law. I published on Islamic slavery, and I do the Ottoman Empire. Originally, I did ancient Middle East, and I did ancient Iraq, and my mentor, Dr. Tanya Sharlock at Oklahoma State University, she has her PhD from Harvard, the smartest people I've ever met. She literally wrote the book on Ur 3. So anyway, I originally did that until I switched fields for professional reasons. At the time, there was a lot more money going into Islam, because, within the context of like the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and academia was just sort of flowing that way at the time. But I ended up going on a trip to Turkey, and I really enjoyed it. So anyway, I just got back to the US. I got my PhD from the University of Cyprus, which is an ethnically Greek island just 60 miles off the coast of Syria. Behind me, you'll notice the Greek flag, and that is because I love Greece, and I especially love ancient Greece. Next to me here, I have an Orthodox icon. That is the Theotokos, the bearer of God. That's Mother Mary, if you're Catholic. I am a Greek Orthodox. And I spent almost a decade over in Cyprus and Greece, learning Greek, but also learning about the Ottoman Empire, learning about Islam. And that is why this week is so near and dear to my heart, because we are starting on Dark Ages Greece. We're not quite to the Classical Age. I have been called many a times in my life a Greekaboo, which is a title I wear proudly, even though it's hilarious. For those of you who don't get the joke, Western kids who are overly sort of infatuated with anime in Japan get called weeaboos, and my friend Yorgo Gauchida, he calls me a Greekaboo. So anyway, this week we are talking about Greece. We're talking about just before classical Greece, which is more 4th century, and this is more 8th century BC. So this is 800 years before Christ. And every single week, I want to give you lectures that sort of help you situate what we're talking about. Because this is an 8-week course, I really have to limit what I'm allowed to give you. If you were in my 16-week course, I can guarantee you would be doing much more reading. And one of the things that we would read together is the Iliad right here. This is a great book, and this is one of the most ancient epic poems ever written. And if you want to study classics, if you want to study philosophy, if you want to understand the Western canon of philosophy, this is really your starting point. And it's because it's the starting point for ancient Greece. All the great ancient philosophers, Aristotle and Plato and Socrates, are referencing the values that are laid out in this book. Now, even though I can't make you read this book, I have a whole bunch of videos on it. And I want you to watch those videos. I want you to read those quotes, those excerpts from the Iliad. And I want you to listen to what I'm going to say about the Iliad. And then in the discussion and the short essay below, I want you to talk about the values that are in this book. It's so important. not only for understanding the Western canon and Western civilization, but for understanding how you relate to the ancients yourself. Uh, People simply thought differently back in this time. They're the same people as us, you know. It's only a few thousand years, in neuroevolutionary terms, it's actually not a very long time at all. Nothing has really changed physiologically with our brains. They have the same sort of neural setup we do, but they had different values. They had different geographical realities, they had different environmental realities, they had different social realities, and it formed the way that they felt and thought about the world. And even though the way we think about the world is often very different, we can sort of draw this consistent line from our civilization all the way back here. And so, in that spirit, in understanding philosophy and understanding history, and especially understanding the name of this class, Western Civilization, this is ground zero right here. And in your own time, I would highly suggest you read it. I'm not going to lie to you, it is a difficult read. Most ancient literature, whether we're talking about the Bible or we're talking about the Iliad, is a very, very difficult read. There's translations, and the message it's sending is often more important than like the stylisms and the importance of the prose. So, anyways, now little context. What's going on in the Iliad? The Iliad is written by a Greek man in the 8th century, whose name is Homer. And Homer is living in what we might call Dark Ages Greece. This is just before the Classical era. So this is not Dark Ages like medieval Europe. That comes after the fall of the Roman Empire in 410. About the middle of the 5th century AD, so 500 years after Christ is what we're going to begin with the Middle Ages. But the Dark Age of Greece, called as such because it's sort of like the pre-classical era. It's named as such later. All the sort of great names you associate with Greece, especially whenever it comes to the sophists and philosophy, haven't shown up yet. They don't show up until the 4th century, which is the classical age of Greece. Much of the values and ideas that we have about Greece and that the Greeks had about themselves are being formed during this time, and this is the 8th century BC. So this is 800 years before Christ. Now, the Iliad takes place, ostensibly, supposedly, in about 1190, so 400 years before Homer. Now, the Greeks living during that time period are the Mycenaeans, and so the videos that you're going to watch on the Mycenaeans are about the ancient Mycenaean Greeks. Mycenaean Greece was a scattered series of tribes and polises. Polis is Greek for a city, Ipoli is the city. And I'll go more into the definition of a polis and what they consider to be a polity. A lot of that really comes from Aristotle on politics. There are all these different Greek city-states, and they're all sort of like fiercely loyal to their own polity. The one thing they can agree on, they all hate each other. The one thing they can all agree on is that they are Greek. And indeed, a Mycenaean king named Agamemnon, which means, it roughly translates to like the steadfast or the very resolute man, is going to come along, and he's going to unite many of the Mycenaean kingdoms. And he is supposedly going to wage a war on this city of Troy over a young man named Paris, who was a bit of a womanizer, seducing his young wife, Helen of Troy. And this is the woman so beautiful that she will launch 1,000 ships and begin the Trojan War. If you read the Trojan War, see, this is what happens. All right. I'm not doing another video. I'm not doing a take 4. I'm not doing a take 4 of this. So, anyways, what happens is that ostensibly Helen of Troy is taken. Agamemnon is very angry at this slight that's been performed against him, and his pride, which is an important word. In Greek, perifania. Perifania is the term for pride. His perifania is going to cause him to not be able to let go of this slight, and thousands of men are going to die over this wedding dispute, which has this sort of more complex metaphysical background, this interplay between gods feuding amongst each other, which is detailed in here and in the videos that I put down there. So, the Iliad is this semi-mythical event happening in the 12th century BC, so 1200 years before Christ. 800 years before Christ, so the 8th century BC, you have Homer, who is congealing an oral tradition that has been passed down through the Greeks, from the Mycenaeans to these Greeks. So 400 years of oral tradition, which is, by the way, why we suppose that it's written in a hexameter sort of poetic format, is because as an oral tradition it was often sung, and the way Greeks would entertain each other was singing. They would have these amphitheaters, and they would all like go sing and stuff. They would go sing these epics to each other. Now, the important thing about the Iliad is we know that as an oral tradition, it was used to educate children. Well, it wasn't just used to educate children, it was used to educate everybody. This is how culture is transmitted, not only from parent to child, but also through sort of like these public events where public myths and narratives are put out in an entertaining way, and everybody sort of engages in this collective construction of the polis. And what that means is that this book is just chock full of Greek values. Whether or not the events, and this is very important because due to many of like sort of the religious tensions, maybe not today, but back whenever I was going through college, there was this thing called the New Atheist Movement. And so, campuses held all these sort of events about like refuting religion. And, Bill Nye went and debated like Ken Ham, and it was all like sort of this absurd show. But it misses the point. Whether or not what's in the Bible is true, whether or not what's in the Iliad, whether or not what's in the Epic of Gilgamesh is true, is aside from the point that the people who were reading it and the people who wrote it took it very, very seriously. And even if you don't think the events within the Iliad are historical, understanding the events in the Iliad and how they were perceived by Greeks who received this tradition helps you understand how people thought at this time. What were their social mores? What were their values? How did it influence their decisions? And so in that spirit, I'm going to talk about some of the themes that I want you to watch out for as you're reading excerpts from the Iliad, as you're sort of watching the short narration in the 2 videos that I put below. And even though I should know these off the top of my head, I have them written down here in the. I'm told I'm impressive for being able to lecture without notes. That's not entirely true. I have to put these down here. So anyway, first we have the value of kleos. Or in modern day Greek, phimi. So kleos is the ancient Greek idea of fame. And this is probably the second most important value within the Iliad, because what motivates so many of the characters, especially Achilles, who is, played by Brad Pitt in the movie, and Achilles is supposed to represent like the ultimate Greek Giga Chad. And it's like, I know that's a stupid meme term, but it 100% describes how Achilles would have been seen. Achilles is the original Chad. The only like older Chad than him might be Gilgamesh or Sargon of Akkad. And what motivates Achilles is fame. It's the search for kleos. It's the search for glory. And indeed, he is told at one point during the Iliad that if he goes and he chooses to fight for Agamemnon and Troy, that he will die. He will not have a nostos, which is a homecoming, which is another theme in the Iliad and the Odyssey, which is the whole theme of coming home, what it's like to come home after going through a traumatic event. You come home in these experiences and these thoughts you have. And Achilles is told directly by his minor goddess mother, you will die, but you will have glory. And in the Iliad itself, he has sort of this conversation with himself, where he sort of throws back and forth and says, if I go back home, I can have a wife, I can have children, I can have a nostos, I can have a happy life with my wife and kids. Or I can go absolutely club to death this Trojan prince and commit war crimes and drag his body around the city of Troy, and I can gain all this fame. He does indeed gain that fame. We're still talking about him today. He's one of the most important figures in the understanding of not only Greek history, but Western civilization. But he dies. He gets an arrow in the ankle. So ostensibly his mother goddess wanted to make him immortal, so she dipped him in this sacred pool that made him immortal, and she held him by his ankle. So the only part of his body that was not covered by the waters of this pool were his ankle. And so it was the one part of his body that was actually vulnerable. And at the end of the siege on Troy, he's shot in the heel, which is why it's called the Achilles heel or the Achilles tendon. It's that tendon on the back of your foot, which if it's severed, you basically can't stand up. That's ostensibly where Achilles was shot. What drives Achilles to do this is perifania, it's pride. I just said that in the most Greek fashion possible, the perifania. It's perifania, it's pride, but more than that, it's this other value. And this is something that you should know. Not just for the sake of studying philosophy, but this is a great term to just understand social relationships with other people in general, or understanding how some people are motivated. If you guys have heard, there's this term hubris, Hubris. That comes from the Greek ivris. In ancient Greek, you put breath marks, which is an H at the beginning of words that start with some vowels, and so we sort of mistranslate it as hubris, but it's ivris. In modern Greek, it's where we get the word curse from, ivrisi, ivrisi, ivrisies. So, or like in Cypriot, vrishis, which are literally curse words, naughty words. Hubris is basically lethal pride. It's a lethal stubbornness where you do something even though you know it's stupid and it eventually leads to your death. You say that man has hubris. People would say about Custer and his assault on Little Bighorn that Custer displayed hubris and he died. He paid for it. He paid for his hubris. I think, and there's some scholars on this that would disagree with me, and there's scholars that they actually do this for a living. I do love Greece and Greek culture, but in a lot of ways I am just sort of a dude commenting on this. I think the most important theme within the Iliad is ker, in modern Greek mira, the translation being fate. The reason why I think this is so important, and the reason why I emphasize this so much, is because if you really want to get at the center of the difference between the ancient mind and the modern mind, it really lies in our interpretations of the importance of choice, of personal choice, and fate and destiny. So what do I mean by that? You've grown up in a society where your parents probably encouraged you, if you grew up in a socioeconomic condition, to do so, where your parents were just like, I want you to do what makes you happy. That's a really, really new thing. And whenever I say new, it's younger than 100 years old. For most of human history, you're going to perform the job that your parents performed. You're probably going to be a farmer, and you're probably going to help take over your parents' farm. If your father's a shoemaker, you're probably going to end up being a shoemaker, and you are going to help carry on the shoemaking industry. If you're a woman and you marry into a hat maker's family, congratulations, you are now a professional hat maker. Also, ideas of marriage and love. Most marriages in ancient Greece and ancient Rome were involuntary. They were arranged marriages. And the idea that you see that comes out in Greek and Roman literature is that you get married first, usually at a very young age, usually just past puberty. You get married, and then you are a good husband to your wife, and your wife is a good husband, or your wife is a good wife to you. Each spouse does their duty according to their society, and they have lots of literature outlining what the duties of husbands and wives are. And then love comes with the performance of those duties. And so, in order to have a society like this, one of the sort of philosophical pieces of software you need people to have is this idea of fate. There's an ancient Roman term in Latin. If you've taken a Latin class, you'll learn it there. Amor fati, like love your fate, accept your fate. And there's very much this idea throughout the Iliad and throughout ancient Greece that it is noble and it is good to accept your fate. You may not want to marry this person. You may not want to be a farmer, but you have a duty to your family and to your parents to do this marriage, to take over this farm work. And so it's considered a pious act. It's a good act towards the gods. It's considered very selfish and very dangerous to just go off and do whatever you want. Now, that sounds very terrible and oppressive to us. The entirety of modern sort of civilization is based on radical individualism. Modern Western civilization is about radical individualism. And radical, and that's because liberalism won. And I mean this in the sense of classical liberalism. So classical liberalism is basically like, 18th century. The individual is the like high the apex of society, and all institutions that suppress individual expression need to be done away with, and that's like the church and the family. Markets are very sort of like pro-individual, because if individuals do nothing else but consume, then markets work because money keeps flowing. And probably the greatest transition from ancient ideas to modern ideas is this concept of fate. And I think we're both sort of sitting on opposite. We're sitting at the worst places on opposite ends of the spectrum. On the one hand, you have sort of ancient Greek and as we'll see, ancient Roman society, which supposes that individual choice is an impious act, and that you should accept your fate all the time, even if it seems unjust. And of course, I don't think that's always right. But I do think it's pro social. I think it helps make civilization work. And you're going to hear me use that term a lot, whether or not something is pro social or anti-social. And I do think an ethos of accepting one's duty, as is pushed in the Iliad, can be good. Basically doing for others at the expense of yourself, at the expense of your own want. And on the other hand, in our society, we have sort of this total individualism, where the whole idea of your parents arranging a marriage for you, or your parents deciding for you what job you're going to do, we sort of find that anathema. And even though that might temporarily feel very good to us, sometimes we go off and we end up making very bad decisions and screwing ourselves over, realizing that our parents were right. Maybe not. I mean, maybe your parents suck, but this is a story that a lot of people end up living through. And part of the reason why that's such an archetype and that happens so much is because we've sort of buffed out of our society this idea of accepting one's fate. So whether or not you think these are good values or bad values, you can write about that down below. But this idea of mira or care or fate. This is very much in the Iliad. All the characters have instances where they have to accept or reject their fate. Achilles is once again told, if you go and you fight in the Trojan War, you are going to die, but you'll get this fame. And Achilles accepts it. And during this dialogue with himself, he says, I accept my fate. I think it's good that I accept my fate. And many of the characters, Odysseus and Agamemnon, they sort of rise and fall on the ideas of hubris and fate and the accepting of fate. We also have time, which is honor. Honor is often interpreted as sort of very difficult to define. I don't think it's all that difficult to define. It's sort of this informal series of interpersonal relational codes that societies have to make society work. Everybody interacts in a respectful way towards each other to sort of mitigate the likelihood of violence occurring. And honor comes, and it's good to be honorable in a society that doesn't have sort of electronic identification and doesn't have these sort of great stacked bureaucracies like we've developed in the modern world. The way that you managed your affairs with other people is through reputation, and reputation mattered. If you go and you speak to your grandparents, they'll even talk to you about the importance of reputation, because there is sort of no if you go over to the next town and nobody recognizes you, you can sort of get away with whatever the hell you want. There were a lot of times that people actually did that, but what would happen is if you were like a businessman and you were from Athens and you wanted to go do business down like Sparta or past like the Peloponnesus, people would rely on your reputation. They would ask you what kind of man you are. And honor is the expression of this reputation. Or rather, your reputation is an expression of your honor. Whenever you act honorably towards other people, you develop a good reputation. This makes it easier for you to provide for your family and navigate the world. Now, in modern societies, we've come to sort of view honor as this archaic, atavistic, oppressive thing, right? It's sort of it's a word we see as only appropriate in agricultural level, like warrior societies. I happen to think that honor and duty are very important. I think they should be taken seriously. I think one of the reasons we don't take them seriously is because we lived in these sort of like highly bureaucratized societies, and we have this sort of hyper individualist ethos that just sort of that fills the entire like miasma of culture that we're swimming in. Let's see here. What else do we have? Menes, fury, wrath. Another thing you're going to find occurring in the Iliad a lot is a lot of men and a lot of gods and goddesses getting very, very angry and then doing very, very terrible things based off that wrath. I've mentioned it before. Achilles is angry that his cousin Patroclus has been killed by Hector, even though Patroclus dons Achilles' armor because Achilles is refusing to fight because he's pissed off at Agamemnon. And so Patroclus, his little cousin and bro, puts on his armor and he goes and fights, and Hector slays him. And even though Achilles did not want to fight for Agamemnon, the death of his cousin spurs him into wrath and fury. And not only does he defeat Hector, but he does something very dishonorable to Hector, and he desecrates his body and humiliates him and does not allow a funeral display. They eventually negotiate to have their funerals. And this is considered very dishonorable. This is a part of Achilles' hubris. This is eventually why Achilles will die. So I think I've covered the main values of the Iliad. So I've covered kleos, which is glory and fame, ker, mira, which is fate, which I think is probably the most important one. There's nostos, which is the idea of homecoming. And that's not just in the Iliad, that's also in the Odyssey. That's a big theme in the Odyssey, is Odysseus, after leaving the Trojan War and going on his adventures and running into Circe the witch and Scylla and Charybdis and going to the underworld. He eventually makes it back home where hilarity ensues and he has to kill all of his wife's potential suitors. Time, honor. And the Mene, which is fury. And I say Perifania, but I mean, let's just stick that with like kleos and glory and fame. Perifania is a modern Greek word. I actually don't know the ancient Greek word for pride. I hope it's Perifania. Like the modern Greek word for wrath is orgi. So anyway, these are all sort of the values that are in the Iliad. Now, once you've watched these videos on the Iliad, once you've watched this incredibly long and sort of snaking lecture, and you sort of understand what's going on, I want you to consider this because it's going to become very important next week. And that's that the values that are in the Iliad, whether you like them or not, and I do want to hear whether or not you like them, whether or not you think they're good values, I want you to hear your interpretation of them. These values are what the philosophers of the classical age are talking about. This is what they are referencing. So, some of the most important texts in human history we are about to read excerpts from. And I have my scanner working right here, and I have my collection of Greek books. I have, well, okay, I can't make you read Platonos Polaidia. I can't make you, this is The Republic by Plato. I can't make you read it in Greek. Don't worry, I have an English copy. I'm going to scan it, and we're going to read excerpts from it. The most important books ever written in Western civilization are what I'm going to introduce you to next week. And if you actually read what I scan out for you and put on Moodle, and you really absorb it, and if you have questions, talk to me about it. This is what I do. I'm your teacher. I'm your professor. This is my job. I want you to think about what it says. So like a great example is we're going to read excerpts from Plato's Republic. Plato's Republic in Book 8. He goes on this giant roast of all the different sort of regimes. You can go on Wikipedia and look up for a summary, Plato's 5 regimes. But Plato supposes that all human systems move. No human system of politics truly lasts, and one sort of collapses into the other. And it's like, if you go read his description of democracy and how it folds into tyranny, which goes to oligarchy and through and through and through, as you're reading it, it's kind of frightening. It gives you a little bit of a pit in your stomach. This is a man writing like in the 4th century BC, and he's giving a description of like modern day politics that he shouldn't be able to give. But the ancient Greeks were very, very smart, and they condensed some of the greatest philosophical works possible. I mean, they also wrote a lot of really terrible stuff. I'm sure if you read enough Plato or Aristotle, you'll find that they had very uh, sort of terrible sexual appetites, which is a real thing. And they talk about beauty and sexuality as well. But if you read them, especially if you read their works on politics, you will have access. You will be miles ahead of everybody else. So many of the philosophers and writers of the modern day who sort of comment on this stuff professionally. Like, there are a couple of levels of political discourse. And on one level, there's like your friends, or like your parents, and they're probably sitting on this level of like they watch CNN all day, or they watch Fox, and they're like, oh, did you hear what Biden did today, or did you hear what Trump did? And that's like one level of discourse. But above that, there's this deeper level of discourse about ideas and about systems and about people and about how we move and maintain these systems. And if you read Aristotle on politics, if you read Plato's Republic, which I'm going to have us read just the most important stuff from all that. It won't be too much because you already have your textbook, and that's important. I want you to have that. You are going to understand so much more about the history of Western civilization, about the political situation you live in now, which is what I want for you. That's what I'm trying to get you to do. In fact, I have right over, what do I have here? I have, like, next to me, you can't see it, I have a bookshelf with all my classical stuff. I have Plato, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius. So it's almost mandatory that as a 25-year-old man, you go through a breakup and eventually you get a copy of Marcus Aurelius Meditations. So for any of the young men in there, Marcus Aurelius, it's good stuff. Anyway, I'm going to get working on scanning that stuff. I want you to read about the Iliad. I want you to read about Dark Age Greece. I want you to read the videos that I put down in the description. I'm going to put up a little bit more information on Achaemenid Persia for the short essay, because even though this is Western civilization, Achaemenid Persia is very important. Achaemenid Persia under, I think it was Cyrus, Darius, and Xerxes, as my mentor called him, Xerxes the Jerxes. This is also the Xerxes portrayed in 300. So I don't know if you guys, how old you are, if you've seen the movie 300, Frank Miller. It is not historically accurate. However, it is sort of mythically accurate to what happened at the gates of Thermopylae, the hot gates. And this is where there was this huge misunderstanding, which you'll talk about in the Greco-Persian War, where the Greeks basically, in Athens, there's a monarchical faction and a democratic faction, and they're having a disagreement as to who is going to rule the city of Athens. Well, I think the democratic faction, the monarchical faction sends an emissary to the Persian Empire and basically says, we need Persian imperial help. Won't you march into Greece and help us put down the democratic faction? Well, they didn't have cell phones during this time period, so Persia marches all the way to Greece under Xerxes. And whenever Xerxes gets there, the democratic faction has won out. And they don't want to answer to the Persians. They're foreigners, and the Greeks are not big on foreigners. Fun fact, the term barbarian comes from the Greek insult for people who are not Greek. So if you are a Greek and you want to make fun of the way non-Greeks speak, you would say bar, bar, bar. So they're like, oh, non-Greeks go bar, bar, bar. And this is actually where we get the term barbari, or barbarians. So, fun fact, we get that because the Greeks were super racist. And they carry on that great tradition today. I love them, though. So anyways, Xerxes shows up, and the Greeks basically say, sorry, we don't want your help. And Xerxes basically says, well, I didn't march here for nothing. And it initiates the invasion of Greece. The Greco-Persian War is going to produce many heroes which are going to be interpreted in the light by philosophers of this book here, of the Iliad, which you're going to read, or you're going to watch videos on. I really wish I could assign this book to you guys. Anyway, that's it. It looks like I've gone on for 34 and a half minutes now. If you have any questions, I want you to go ahead and email me and ask me. It's confusing material, and we're covering a whole lot of time. But this is my job. I am your professor. I am Dr. Sean Broyles. I spent, my whole adult life teaching this stuff, and I really care about this stuff, and I really care about educating you on this. So do the discussion, do the short essay, which I'm about to put up as of the making of this video. It's not up. And I will see you guys down in the discussion. You're doing a great job. I appreciate every single one of you.